Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, even as I see there's still more individuals joining our Zoom room. My name's Ann Murphy, and I'm the director of the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. And we're very happy today, along with the Mental Health Association of New York State, to be offering day 2 of our virtual conference, supporting school mental health in the wake of COVID-19. So welcome back to those of you who joined us yesterday, and a new welcome to those of you who are joining for the first time for today's session. We're very happy to have Dr. Ken Ginsberg with us, and he'll be starting in just a few minutes here. I wanted to just do a brief orientation, make sure we're all on the same page for those of you who are new to the conference today. Dr. Ginsberg, if you don't mind just clicking to the next slide. Thank you. So just quick orientation, we're using Zoom as our platform for today. We're happy for you all to be engaging with the presenter and with the rest of us, the panelists, throughout today's morning session. So please use the 2 features within Zoom. We have the chat feature that we encourage you to use to communicate with each other and with the panelists. So feel free to comment, provide ideas, thoughts, insights that you are thinking about as you listen to the presentation. You can also share resources, links, ideas about things you've done in your own educational settings or things you might want to start to do. So please feel free to do that. Within the chat, I do want to highlight that there's an option for who can see your chat. So if you want everyone to be able to see your chat, you need to click on the 2 drop-down list and switch it to panelists and all attendees. That way all of your fellow attendees will be able to see your comment. The default is just for the panelists to be able to see your comments. So just make sure that you control that so that the people you want to see your comment are able to. We also encourage you to use the Q&A feature. This is how you will present questions to Dr. Ginsberg or to the other panelists. So if you have a question that you would like us to pose to the presenter throughout this talk, please put it in the Q&A box. That way we can keep track of all the different ideas versus questions, etc. So a couple other things. You will be asked to complete an evaluation after this presentation. We really appreciate you doing it. It's very brief if you haven't done it yet. It's about 1 to 2 minutes. If you're joining this Zoom session from your computer, you'll be automatically redirected to that site. If not, you can go to the program that you received and click on the survey link. That allows us both to get your input and helps to guide our future offerings. It also allows our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. It allows them to see who we're connecting with, how we're connecting with people, and what we're being able to offer, and the feedback on that. So we would really appreciate your couple minutes to complete that at the end of the session. I believe that's everything. So with that, I want to welcome Dr. Ginsberg to talk about the power of resilience-based, trauma-sensitive, strength-focused communication in working with youth. We're very excited to have him with us today. He has an immense amount of experience and expertise in this area. Dr. Ginsberg practices adolescent medicine at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and is a professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. He directs health services at Covenant House, Pennsylvania, where he serves Philadelphia's youth enduring homelessness. He practices social adolescent medicine with special attention to prevention and the recognition that social context and stressors affect both physical and emotional health. His research over the last 30 years has focused on facilitating youth to develop their own solutions to social problems and to teach adults how to better serve them. He is the founding director of the Center for Parent and Teen Communications, which works with key influencers to empower parents with the strategies and skill sets that will strengthen their family connections and position them to guide their teens to become their best selves. It works to shift the cultural narrative about adolescence from being a time to survive to one in which development is to be optimized and celebrated. Its parenting website, parentandteen.com, was awarded the 2019 Seal of Approval from the National Parenting Center. Dr. Ginsberg has also written a few books, including Building Resilience in Children and Teens, Giving Kids Roots and Wings, and Raising Kids to Thrive, Balancing Love with Expectations and Protection with Trust. He also has a multimedia toolkit, Reaching Teens, Strength-Based Communication Strategies to Build Resilience and Support Healthy Adolescent Development, which offers youth-serving professionals the trauma-sensitive strategies to more effectively build youth. He's been honored to offer consultation in building resilience and developing strong youth to the Boys and Girls Club of America, the National Congress of American Indians, and the Military Child Education Coalition, among others. He currently works with Covenant House International's 35 sites to solidify and magnify their practice model rooted in the healing power of loving and respectful adult connections with youth. We're very happy to have him here with us today, and I will turn it over to you, Dr. Ginsberg.
Thank you so much, Anne. It is genuinely a privilege to be spending time with you. We're going to be spending a long time together, 3.5 hours. And listening to one guy talk for 3.5 hours can be overwhelming. So let me tell you what the plan is. We'll take breaks every about hour, and we'll stop for questions at a couple points. We'll stop for questions after I'm talking about development and the teen brain. We'll stop for questions again after I really talk about trauma-sensitive practices, and we'll stop for questions finally at the end to really wrestle with some of the ideas that come up. But today, we're talking about the power of the kind of communication that lets a person know that you see them as they deserve to be seen, that's trauma-sensitive, that develops them, that honors them, and the power of this communication to heal them and to begin the process of change for them. So let's begin. So this young child, take a look in his eyes, right? This kid is the screensaver on my computer. He's about 2 years old. And I was surfing the internet one day and he grabbed me. He grabbed me because of the crinkles between his eyes and because of that smile. In him, I see hope. In him, I see joy. In him, I see a reminder of why I do what I do. In him, I'm reminded of my own children because I have identical girls, but only one of them had the crinkles between her eyes. And that's one of the ways that I could tell the difference between them. And when she would come at me, I would be like, no, not the eyebrows, because I couldn't say no to anything she requested. I feel spiritual in this kid's presence. That's what he does for me. This kid is on a refugee boat. This kid was just picked up, well, actually he's on an Italian Navy boat now, having gotten off of a refugee boat that was sinking. I don't know what happened in the first couple of years of his life that made his family determine that it was worth risking their life and getting on a rickety boat in order to have a better life for him. But I know that he probably saw things that I will never see. But I do know with certainty what happened in the last hour of his life. And in the last hour, he saw terror, he saw fear, he saw people thinking they were going to die. They got cold and they got wet and there was probably screaming. Talk about uncertainty. In the last hour, the people in this boat did not know if they would survive. And yet, this kid brings joy to our spirits. Why? This picture, as it turns out, is probably the best picture I've ever seen of human resilience. Because it not only demonstrates it right in front of you, it even shows you from where it comes. This picture is not about the child at all. This picture is about the adults that surround the child. This picture gives you the answer of why children, how children can get through uncertain times by co-regulating, by borrowing the emotions of the adults around them. This picture tells you that kids will be okay when the important adults in their lives believe in them, see them, protect them, focus on them. And I'm also not very good at math, but I count 3 adults in this picture. So assuming that one is a mommy and one is a daddy, what it tells you is that when the parents are there for the kids, the rest of us are additive. But what we need to know is that when the parents are not there for the young kids, then, or the young people, the rest of us become absolutely critical. And that's what we're going to spend 3.5 hours talking about. Being the kind of adults that young people deserve in their lives. 2020. This is a year that is going to shape this generation. This generation will be talking to their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren about what happened in 2020. I believe that we are living through an inflection point in human history. First, we were already there. Because what we have known in the last basically 20 years, but really the last 10 years, is we have an understanding of what has caused so much of the pain, so much of the suffering, so much of the disease in humanity. See, we have always known that bad things ran in communities. We've always known that something bad happening to a grandmother made it more likely to happen to the grandchild. We've known that. And then what happened is we responded in the only way that we could, or not the only way we could, but the way people chose to do, which is we blamed the victims and we blamed the families and we othered them. And that is at the root of all of the problems, of the division, of the derision that we bestow upon other people. It is at the root of our isms, racism, is that we have blamed the victims. And now the science is exquisitely clear. The science now shows that the problem is that when we do not protect the children, childhood trauma affects the body, the brain, and therefore the behavior, indeed, even their genetics. So we stand at an inflection point in human history. We understand now that it's about protecting the children. And when adults do not have the resources to be able to protect the children, it hurts and passes along problems from one generation to another. So we stand at an inflection point of human history, and I believe that 2020 could be an awakening in this country. It is a scary time, and I am not an optimist. I'm a realist who chooses to be aspirational, who chooses to believe that this moment in time could actually make us aware of things that were always there, but hiding in plain sight. So this unsettling time is going to leave a generational mark on young people. The question is, how can we adults shape the impact that it leaves? And some of that we're going to be talking about today. We know that childhood trauma affects the body, the brain, behavior, and even genetics. But as a result, we have seen that there has been a very powerful trauma-informed movement in the last decade. And I believe that in many ways, that movement has really helped us understand humanity, understand racism and the other isms, right? But I also believe that it's backfired in a big way. Why? Because when you become trauma-informed, then what happens is you become aware of problems, and you should and must become empathetic. And you begin changing your lens from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, as you should. But the problem is when you therefore know that something bad has happened to someone and you begin lowering your expectations on that person. If you begin lowering your expectations on that person, then make no mistake about it, you have become one more chain in the link of oppression. So we need a different model. We need to figure out how to integrate all we have known from the last 60 years about how to develop, celebrate, and raise youth. So the model that I'm going to be talking to you about today is an integrated model. We don't call it trauma-informed, we call it trauma-sensitive. Why? Because I don't care what you know, I care what you do. And I care that in addition to being trauma sensitive, you stay rooted in the power of positive youth development. Because if you do, you would never lower your expectations on anybody. Instead, you will raise them so that every kid can become their very best self. And by the time this talk is over, you will see how and why, even scientifically, not to mention spiritually, the young people who have been through the most often have the most to bring to the world. So lower your expectation on nobody, raise it. Positive youth development. And we bring in the science of all that it takes to build resilience in human beings. We need a model that acknowledges pain, but that sees the best in people. We need a model that acknowledges structural racism and undermining forces of low expectations, but that prevents a new label from being applied to already marginalized communities. We don't need marginalized communities to have an extra label of trauma slapped on them. In contrast, we have to recognize their resilience, recognize their inherent strengths of the communities and cultures that have been able to withstand despite, that have drawn together despite external forces that would seek to divide them. And this is what today's talk is about. This is an integrated model that puts together all that we know of positive youth development, resilience building strategies, and trauma sensitive practices, and that applies them. And this is a model that is available to you through two sources. On your right is Building Resilience in Children and Teens. It's just a book. It's a book that can be used by parents. It can be used by community members about everything we know about building resilience. On the left is a comprehensive multimedia toolkit that reaches many, many different disciplines, and even through the internet creates a completely different experience for people in juvenile justice, in substance use, in physical recreation, in organizations that serve youth enduring homelessness, in healthcare, in educational setting, and in foster care. 7 different, and positive youth development, 8 different ways that you can navigate this toolkit with 95 chapters and 45 films. Deeply trauma sensitive, deeply diverse, and totally and fully strength-based. Also, it is a continuing education credit opportunity for up to 6 years of continuing education for social workers, all healthcare providers, and counselors. So at the root of all of the models, all of these 3 models, is the primacy and the power of human relationships, both to build strong, successful youth and to heal those who've endured hardships. We also have to turn without apology to restorative practices. Stop the punitive practices that take people who are already hurt and hurt them more. Take people who need human connection and separate them from us. People who don't understand discipline and instead understand control and choose to attempt to control people through punitive practices. And we need to move instead fully towards restorative practices that include people, that return people to our communities. We seek the sweet spot. We seek the sweet spot that really will tie together all of these models and take into account what we know from brain development. So in this paragraph, you will see the 3 models and restorative practices, all put in a blender without any jargon that tells us what we need to do. See, we know that young people need safe, secure, and sustained relationships to thrive. An attaboy doesn't change anybody, but a sustained relationship with an increased and consistent dose of loving and respectful interactions can absolutely change a human being. So we know that young people need safe, secure, and sustained relationships to thrive. We even know that such relationships can allow them to heal from hard past. But we also must guide them so they're accountable to being their best selves. And when we do so, they must know that our high expectations are rooted in our caring, and ideally, our efforts at accountability must enhance rather than disrupt our protective relationships. In that paragraph, you see it's trauma sensitive, it's committed to celebrating development, it's about resilience at its core, it understands brain science, and it insists on restorative practices. Let's talk about resilience for a minute. Resilience is the ability to overcome adversity. It's the capacity to bounce back. It is certainly the ability to survive difficult times. That practically is the definition. But it's more than that. Because if you put into place for someone the ability to be able to survive the worst of times, you have people who will draw from the juice of life and therefore will be able to thrive in the very best of times as well. To understand resilience, you have to understand that resilience is a mindset. It is about how we think. And to understand how we think, you have to understand that resilience is how we respond to stress. To understand stress, you have to understand that we all come from the jungle. And 50,000 years ago, the most dangerous thing that could happen to us is that we would see this guy's great-great-great-grandpa. We are designed to be able to run from the tiger. And if you don't believe me, think about what happens to your body. So here I am in my jungle chair, and I am sitting and I am looking around and I smell a tiger. What am I supposed to do? I am supposed to immediately jump and run. So where do I need the blood right now? Where I need the blood is in my legs, my butt, which is my jumping muscle, and my legs, which are my running muscle. Where does the blood come from? The blood comes from your belly, which is where you have 50 to 60% of your blood if you're just chilling and you've just eaten a meal. So what's the first thing you feel physically when you smell a tiger? Butterflies. Why? Because that is the blood shifting from your belly to go to your butt so you can jump. Tell me that's not cool, right? Then your heart beats fast. Why? So you can pump that blood. You sweat so you can cool off. You breathe fast so you can oxygenate that blood. Your pupils get big so you can jump over the log even if it's dark out. And you can't think clearly. Why is that? Because you're not supposed to turn to the tiger and say, I don't know, I'd like to work this out with you. And you can't feel fully because you're not supposed to turn to the tiger and say, I'd like to talk about your perspective. I want to better understand why you want to eat me. So during times of maximal stress, we cannot think, we cannot feel, we cannot connect optimally to other human beings. Which means that at its core, resilience is about knowing what is a real tiger and what is not a real tiger. And it is only when we are able to distinguish the two that we are able to bring our best selves to any issue, our ability to think and our ability to connect. Now, here's the thing, guys. There are people who have earned the right to see tigers that you and I would never see. There are people whose brains are exquisitely developed to scan the environment for potential danger. And those are people who have had hard lives. Those are people who have endured consistent trauma in their lives. And our challenge in working with them is to honor the brilliance that they possess to be able to navigate a world that is hard, while working with them to transform their ability to know when they're in real danger and when they're not in real danger. So the issue here is that the tiger that we just saw is actually not the most harmful thing to humanity, because you either got eaten or you didn't. You jumped and run and survived, or you didn't. All of that is adrenaline driven. The hardest thing for humanity is actually when there is uncertainty, when you don't know where the tiger is. Look at this picture. It's a really cool picture, right? If you look at this picture, there's a tiger there. This is the scariest thing within humanity. The tiger could be there, it could be there, it could be anywhere. I don't know where it is. Because this has to have us be ready to jump and to leap at any moment. And the biological processes of being able to jump and leap at any moment, of scanning the environment at all times for potential danger, that biological process is what hurts us. Because the other process is adrenaline driven. This is cortisol driven. Cortisol is what it changes our brain to make us aware of our environment and get us ready to jump at any time. It is cortisol that is the poison to humanity. It is cortisol that is the mediator between stress and harm to our bodies, to our brains, and to our behaviors. It is uncertainty that is the biggest danger to humanity. Where are we in 2020? We are in a year of uncertainty. We have tigers hidden everywhere. We have a virus that we cannot see, and we have a racial awakening. Let's look at this model, and now let's consider racism. For those people who say that racism is a problem of the past, that racism is not something real in everyday life, they are seeing it wrongly. They are seeing racism as a tiger. And they're saying, you know, there's less Ku Klux Klan, less Nazis. That's arguable, but that is what they're saying. Because they are seeing racism as hatred, as blatant hatred. And while that certainly exists, you could argue that there's less of it now, the blatant hatred. The blatant hatred is what creates adrenaline. Adrenaline is not the poison that is the mediator of trauma. Implicit biases, structural racism, never knowing where you stand because systems seem to be designed to keep you down. People's biases seem to make assumptions about you that are not based on who you are, but what you look like. Navigating the streets may not be safe for you when you do normal, everyday human things. That is the tiger in the grass. I can make a strong spiritual, philosophical, and biological argument that the racial awakening needs to understand right now that it is these implicit and structural forces of racism that are the tiger in the grass that have not been removed at all, that we need to join together to remove to really create a healthy population emotionally, spiritually. They're healthy, but emotionally and physically. Why? Because the tiger lurking in the grass is poison to humanity. So we stand at an awakening where finally all public health experts are standing behind the notion of racism being a public health issue and indeed a virus. Where can the greatest progress be made for those with people who have had the hardest lives? So to understand this, you have to begin understanding brain development in a different way. And I'm going to be talking about this in depth later, but for now, you're a baby, you're born. Your nerves are all connected between your brain cells, but in a way that's kind of disorganized and not very efficient. Your development is about taking stimuli or taking experiences that you have repeatedly and making shortcuts through brain pathways that allow you to just see something and know what to expect and react quickly. Infancy, in the beginning, you don't have that. Your brain pathways are being formed with all of your experiences. So you start out being born, and then you make a noise. You make a noise. And your mother recognizes that as a need for nurturance and nourishment and takes out a breast, or she doesn't. And if that happens repeatedly in a sustained way, that she does not respond to, that she does respond by giving you the nurturance and nourishment you need, then what happens is your brain pathways say, the world is predictable, the world is secure, I choose to feel safe within it. But if your mother didn't know to do that because she was too stressed and fighting for resources all the time, what did you learn to do? You learned to cry to get her attention. And when that happened repeatedly, you learned that in order to get attention, you needed to cry. Suppose your mother still does not give you the nourishment or the nurturance that you need, then what do you do next? You scream. And if that happens repeatedly throughout development, you learn that the only way to get to attention is to scream. Now, if you still didn't get nurturance, even when screaming, you learn to stimulate yourself, to give up, to figure out that it doesn't matter how much you scream, you are on your own. And these brain pathways are laid down in 0 to 3 and follow us perhaps into adulthood, but definitely into adolescence. And we see this. in the kids who have given up, in the kids who scream for attention, in the kids who weep for attention. We see this. The question is, how can we change this? This puzzle metaphor, the puzzle of who am I, will be brought up throughout the day. But here is this. Here is what we are trying to understand what we can do. When kids have an expectation of adults that they will not be responsive, that the only way to get attention is to act out, or that they won't be responsive no matter what, then kids come to our interactions expecting the same thing. How do we change their brains? Because here is the astoundingly good news and the root of this talk, is that adolescence is a time of profound plasticity. These brain pathways that are laid down in childhood can absolutely be changed if we give them in doses of safety, security, and we give them in sustained doses. So what do? We create change when we do the opposite of what people expect, and we do it repeatedly. So if young people have learned that their emotions will be denigrated or denied, what do? We elevate them, we celebrate them when they have emotions. We teach them how to process them and release them. We stand by them while they feel. And we teach them that feeling is good. And joining with someone else while you feel is healing. What else do? We do the opposite of what they expect. If kids expect not to be made safe, not to be nurtured, not to be protected, we do the opposite. We go out of our way to protect them, out of our way to nurture them, to be there for them before they ask. And we do this over and over again, and we heal youth, and their brains changed, and the pattern is disrupted, and thereby the pattern is not passed along to the next generation because they will parent. Why do we love? We love so that people know that they are worthy of love. Will it affect them? In front of our eyes sometimes, but sometimes the greatest effect that we might create is intergenerational. When young people know that love works, that meaningful human relationships matter, they're going to raise their kids differently. They're going to be the mother who responds to the utterance, to the small voice without the scream, and thereby we break the cycle of oppression. Today, we're going to be talking about positive youth development and resilience building strategies. We've already begun. We're going to be talking about the adolescent brain. We're going to be giving a basic introduction to trauma-sensitive practices, but mostly after we're done this kind of basic stuff, we're going to be talking about applying it. We're going to give real-life examples about application. We're going to be talking throughout the day about giving control back to people who lost control over their lives. That is one of the core elements of trauma-sensitive practices, is understanding that if you have not been able to control the sanctity of your body, then and then other adults come to you and they tell you what to do in a top-down way, that's not being trauma sensitive. But when you do anything you can to give control back to people, not only is that good for all adolescents who are developing, but it is critical for those people who have suffered from trauma. We're going to consider stress management strategies. I'm going to give you an introduction to them. I'm going to give you a tool that you can begin using today so that your young people can build stress reduction strategies on their own. And we're going to talk about parenting, because whether we're talking to you as parents, and I know that you're going to be wearing your parent hat if you're a parent or a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle, but we're going to be talking about what we know about reparenting kids when we are professionals. And we're going to be talking about changing the cultural narrative about kids, because as long as we continue to believe the myths of adolescence, we will never serve them well, and we will continue to suppress all that is good and right in them. So one thing I want to tell you, and when you go back to your sites and to your organizations, it's a really important thing to note: stay in your own lane. So I'm going to give you counseling tricks, I'm going to give you these concepts, but any individual can stay in their own lane. Because all of this is about brief interventions. It's about being the kind of adult that young people deserve in their lives. But what I'm not doing is teaching you all to be a counselor. But what we all need to do, that won't be covered deeply in this talk, but is covered thoroughly in Reaching Teens, is we have to know how to refer kids to the next step so that they feel nurtured and not abandoned. so that they feel celebrated and not stigmatized, so that they understand that when we refer them to future services, that we are actually recognizing their strengths and trying to build upon them. Let's talk about youth development briefly. How are we going to define success for all young people? The first thing we have to do is we have to stop looking at the kids in front of us. See, when you look at the kids in front of us, you're looking at the 4-year-old and you're going to say, are they happy? That's how you define success. The problem is it's too easy to make a 4-year-old happy, right? Because all you'd have to do is give them a cookie, right? What we have to do instead is understand that we are building a 35-year-old. And we begin imagining what we need the 35-year-old to be successful. And when we do, everything begins changing. So what do we need that 35-year-old to be successful? Number one, we need them to be happy. But happiness in a 35-year-old means something different. It means that you have a sense of meaning and purpose in your life. It means that you have good relationships with people. It's a very, very different definition of success. What else do we need? We need our 35-year-olds to be compassionate, right? To be people who are going to see someone who's downtrodden, and rather than look at them and say, what's wrong with you? They understand that something happened to them. We need people who are hardworking, who have tenacity, who have grit. What is grit? Essentially, it's how do you look at life? Do you look at it as a marathon? This is Angela Duckworth. Do you look at it as a marathon, in which case you're planning ahead, thinking about the obstacles, knowing you have to do it on your own, but you still need people to hand you the juice bottles, right? And when you fall down and you're looking at life as a marathon, what do? You get back up stronger, plan a different route. Or do you look at life as a sprint? I mean, you're going to go right here and run as fast as you can to get to this point and do whatever it takes to get to this point, including tripping the guy next to you. And when you fall down and you're looking at life as a sprint, the game is over. What else do we need? We need kids to be 35-year-olds who are creative and innovative, because all of the best ideas have never occurred yet. What else do we need? We need young people who have collaborative skills. Because if the answer is purple, the people in the room who are only thinking red will never get there until they join with someone who understands blue. What else do we need? We need kids who are going to honor diversity, because that is how we're going to make our nation work, our communities work, when we draw from each other's strengths. And that means doing it differently than my generation did it. As a guy who's about 60, what I'll tell you is that what my generation does is it looks around the room and it counts genders, it counts sexualities, and it counts races. And if there's enough different people in the room, you say, this is a diverse group. That was never diversity. That was tokenism. Real diversity is when you genuinely include the wisdom and lived experiences of the people in the room, and you share in decision making. It's not about presence. It's about inclusion. It's about learning. It's about honoring. It's about growing together. And finally, what else do we need that 35-year-old to be? To be resilient. Because as much as we wish we could wrap our kids in a downy quilt, it's just not possible. What is possible is to teach them how to bounce. And then we have to have as a goal, when we're working with teenagers, not just thinking about the 35, but even now, our goal is not for them to be problem-free. That's not inspirational, right? When I was starting in adolescent medicine, we were so focused on sexual transmission infection. But let me tell you something. Not having chlamydia is not an inspirational message. The goal has to be not to be problem-free, but as Karen Pittman, the mother of youth development, said, the goal has to be fully prepared to lead us into the future. What are the fundamental questions of adolescence? The fundamental question to be answered is, who am I? The questions that come along with that question is, am I normal? And how do I fit in? We have to be there as they are thinking about these questions and understand the undermining forces to asking these questions. Above all, here's what we know. We know that it's about the people that develop the youth. So I'm deeply involved with Boys and Girls Club of America. We have really cool stuff, right? You might come in for the pool or for the basketball court, but I got something to tell you. There isn't a pool that's ever changed a kid's life, not one. It's the swim coach who says to them, You're not going under, not on my watch. It is the people who develop the kids. Now let's talk about brain development. We already talked about it a little bit, but I'd like to really kind of go one step further in it. And at the end of brain development, I'm going to talk about resilience for about 5 more minutes, and then we're going to take a break with your questions. So please be thinking about them now. Let's do some vocabulary. When we're talking about gray matter, you know, that's your nerve cells, also known as your neurons. And I can tell you, a baby, or by the time you're 2, you have pretty much all the gray matter you're going to have in your life. Development, in fact, is about white matter. It's about creating those pathways that we talked about, those connections between the nerve cells that are insulated with myelin. Myelin is white, and that makes things faster and more efficient. Why is this insulated? Because electricity runs through this wire. And if it wasn't insulated, there would be a lot of electricity that would be wasted going into space. So more of it gets to the end because of the insulation. But it also goes faster because it's not wasted. So what development is laying down brain pathways, myelin, brain pathways that create efficiency, so you see something or experience something and immediately know what to do instead of needing to go through all of these ineffective connections. The neural pathways are connections between parts of the brain. What is development? The infant, everything's connected, but through what I call gravelly roads. Not very complicated and not very efficient. What are the pathways? They are the super highways, right? They are what allow things to go through quickly. Where do you build the super highways? Between the towns. You don't just randomly put them down, you put them down between towns. Dopamine is a feel-good brain chemical that offers us rewards, and it is focused in certain reward centers in the brain. In other words, there are areas that are chock full of dopamine and they encourage a behavior. For example, kids have reward centers that go when they are with peers. Why? Because they are designed to want to be with peers. This is how ultimately you get grandchildren. It's a good thing, right? But that's the way their reward centers are designed. The superhighways get built between the towns. The reward centers encourage the towns to get built in certain places, and experiences, for better or worse. Learning is good. Trauma is bad. For better or worse, they also lay down the towns and therefore the brain pathways. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's most involved with cognition. Cognition is fancy talk for thinking, reasoning, planning, decision-making, and dealing with emotions. The amygdala is the part of the brain that is critical to emotional responses. Pruning. We began this talk by talking about how adolescence is a time of astounding plasticity, and that is about shaping neural pathways that increase efficiency. Neuroplasticity is the fact that the brain can change and reshape itself, for better or worse, to adapt to its environment. This is the key to development, and adolescent is the last major window of neuroplasticity, which is why we need to invest very heavily in our adolescence. And again, it's a time of astoundingly rapid brain growth. So here's what you need to know about adolescence. The emotional centers develop first. They are brilliant, right? And the reward systems are very powerful, and they determine where the brain pathways will develop. Pruning is occurring, it is reshaping, and efficiency is developing. But development is a process, not an event. It's not like you have your emotional centers and then you turn 25 and you get your thinking centers. It is that they are all developing together, but the emotional centers are just the teeniest bit ahead, which is key to understand and communicating with adolescents, which is why I'm teaching you this. Next, and this is a key point for today, reasoning ability always exists, but it is solidifying. If you believe one of the great myths of adolescence, which is that adolescents can't be talked to because they have no logic, that is absolutely not true. It's a matter of knowing how you approach them, and knowing brain development gets you there. What's the wrong way to see it? This was an Allstate ad from about 10 years ago that deeply offends me. Why do most 16-year-olds drive like they're missing a part of their brain? Because they are. That's the wrong way to see it. Remember, kids live up or down to your expectations. The fundamental question of adolescence is, who am I? Do you want your 16-year-old thinking that they have a hole in their brain? What's the right way to see it? That adolescence is a critically important opportunity to shape the future. But brains, they're not in bottles. They are in people, who are in families, who are in communities, who are in a nation. Our job is to enrich and protect simultaneously. Adolescence, I'm going to give you the language I want you to begin using. It is still accurate around brain development, but if you just draw from the literature on brain development, you're going to find all this language that is deeply undermining to adolescence, like all engine, no brakes, like hole in the brain, dangerous stuff. Use my language. It is still accurate, and it is pro-adolescent. Adolescents are super learners. There will never be a time again where you will remember as many things as you do from adolescence. It's why you don't remember what you had for breakfast, but you remember what the first person you kissed smelled like. Adolescents are developing their social selves. It is key. Experimentation is a necessity of adolescence, but it's our job to create enriching, exciting, safe opportunities for growth while simultaneously protecting them from harm. So again, the puzzle of adolescence, who am I? Super learners have to push to the edges because new knowledge exists at the edges, right? When we create golden opportunities at those edges, then kids learn a tremendous amount and they stop there. Their brains are driven for new knowledge. Their brains are satisfied. The reward centers go off when they are stimulated, right? And they will go to those edges. Now we need boundaries there that say you cannot stray into unsafe territory. When, however, we do not create those boundaries and we do not create golden opportunities for learning at those edges, the adolescent brain will keep going. What I am saying very clearly is risk is not an inherent part of adolescence. Experimentation is. It is when adults do not do their job that adolescents move into risky territory because they don't stop where they need to. How do you put this together for communicating with kids? There are two parts of the brain that are in development. One is your emotional center, your amygdala. The other is your thinking center. The emotional center is brilliant. It's why adolescents are so effervescent and really get kids. It's other kids. It's why if you have your own teenagers, they look at you sometimes and go like, why do you hate me when you just raise your eyebrow? Because they are seeing everything. Their emotional centers are brilliant. And when we speak to kids in what's called hot communication, high emotional content, especially if it's condescending, if it's angry, or if you communicate in a way that a kid can't understand because their brain isn't ready for it, then you turn on their amygdala. You shame them, you stigmatize them, you make them angry. And when their amygdala is turned on, they are all amygdala, and you cannot reach their rational selves, and you will never accomplish anything because you have made this kid angry, and you're speaking to an amygdala. On the other hand, when you are calm, respectful, learn how to communicate in a way that breaks ideas down into simple steps that they can accept. We're going to give you several examples of doing this later. In a way that honors the intelligence that they do have, rather than shames them for what they haven't developed, then their amygdala feels good. It doesn't need to react. And you are talking to someone who has the same capacity for reasoning as an adult. Similarly, when you are working with someone who's been traumatized, when they don't feel safe because you haven't made them feel safe, when they feel like you are judging them, you are dealing with amygdala, and their amygdalas are brilliant because that's how they've survived. When you start out by assuring safety, co-regulate, and are calm, the kids who have been through the most will bring the most to the table for reasons that I will explain later. Because the amygdala, well, I'll explain it now. The amygdala is not only the root of anger and emotions, it's also the root of compassion and love. So if you've ever noticed that the kids who have had the hardest lives, as long as they're feeling safe, are the best people on earth, the warmest, most compassionate people, the people completely committed to justice, the people, if your car broke down, you want them walking by because they're going to stop to help. There's a reason for this. Of course, I can give you a spiritual and religious reason, but there's even a brain reason, which is that their amygdala is brilliant. It has been hyperstimulated through their life, and they have what I call a protector's brain, which I'm going to be explaining later. Let's spend a couple minutes on resilience, and then we will take some questions and take a break. So the bottom line of resilience, I defined it earlier, but the bottom line of resilience is that young people are going to be more resilient when the important adults in their lives believe in them without condition and hold them to high expectations. Who are those important adults? Clearly, it's supposed to be your mommy and daddy. And when it is, the rest of us are additive. When it's not, the rest of us become really critical in their lives. And what does it mean to believe in someone unconditionally? It doesn't mean like, Johnny, it's okay to do drugs. What it means is, I'm not going anywhere. And what does it mean to hold them to high expectations? The biggest mistake I believe you can make in youth development is to think that high expectations is about grades, trophies, or scores. It's not. It certainly is about effort. But what it's about is bringing kids to be their best selves. The most protective thing in a young person's life is to be seen, to be known as they really are. We're going to be talking about this intensely later. But as parents, when parents know who kids really are and hold them to be accountable to being their best selves, kids rise, because kids rise up or down to the expectations we set for them. Next, really important to know, resilience is not invulnerability. Guys, I could move in your house. I've written books about this. I have this whole multimedia textbook about it. I couldn't make your kids invulnerable, nor would I want to, right? Why? Because when we go back to the beginning of the definition of success, what we realize is that we want our kids to be compassionate. Compassionate doesn't come from adults telling kids to be compassionate. It comes from an earned empathy that often comes from having received empathy when you've had a hard life. So part of what we need to do when we work with those kids who are struggling for the moment the most is to help them understand that having a wide breadth and depth of emotions is actually what predicts their long-term success. Above all, when it comes to resilience, we have to understand the power of human connection. I believe that we stand right now in a moment where we are defining what this generation is going to walk away with. If you look at everything that's happening in 2020, what you're seeing is that people are being separated from each other, either because of COVID or because people are intentionally saying things to separate and divide us. So what that means is that if we play our cards right, I aspire for this generation walking away with understanding the power of human relationships as the generation defining moment. Imagine if this generation walks away saying, because think about it, when these kids go back to school, they are going to value learning amongst their friends like they never did. When these kids can worship together, when these kids can hug their grandmas, right? This is a generation that can be the best generation ever if we play it right. This is also a time of profound stress. And this is a time to show people that we draw together during times of profound stress to draw from each other's strengths. I'm going to read for you a Ginsberg fable that is a modified Aesop's fable, because Aesop wrote a fable about a bundle of sticks. A young person was frustrated, angry, and feeling powerless. The young person even felt as if they were at their breaking point. Sometimes this showed through the words that were spoken or screamed, sometimes through flowing tears, and most often through silence. A loving caregiver approached the young person and said, "I know that these moments are frightening, and sometimes it feels as if we have no control over our lives. Sometimes it even feels as though we'll break, like a stick about to snap. The lesson is driven home when the youth is given a stick and challenged to break it. The young person easily breaks the stick in two, relating to its fragility. The caring adult then gathers several sticks, ties them together, and hands them to the child. Go ahead and try to break the sticks now. The young person tries but can barely even get them to bend. The compassionate adult guide helps the youth to own the wisdom. Each of those sticks by themselves can easily break, but when they're joined with others, they become stronger than if we added all of their individual strengths together. We are like a bundle of sticks. Each of us can be fragile at any moment. Together, we are strong. We will get through this because we are together. If this resilience building idea becomes the lesson that this generation walks away with, then this will be a better world. The last point I want to make about resilience is that resilience can reach its limits. And what people need to know, more than anything, school systems need to understand this point. Because we can talk about resilience. We could even define it as depression. But what does depression look like in adolescence? This is what people don't know. So in adults, it looks like not bathing, not eating or eating too much, not sleeping or sleeping too much, being lethargic, being sad, right? That's what depression looks like in adults. And that also is what it looks like in half of adolescence. But in the other half of adolescence, it looks like irritability, anger, or rage. They're not sad, they're angry. And then what happens is systems look at these kids and call them bad instead of sad. And when we call them bad instead of sad, then this feeds the school to prison pipeline. This is when we punish kids instead of include kids. And we put kids into tracks for bad kids to separate them from the group instead of inviting them for healing. So with that said, I would like to take about 5 minutes of questions, and then we're going to take a 10-minute break. So I'm open to your questions.
Okay, first question, Dr. Ginsberg. What do you think of the uncertainty that is occurring as a country and our world? What happens when we are all experiencing the same thing at the same time?
Yeah, so that's the point I tried to make. Thank you for underscoring it. Because we are all experiencing the same thing at the same time, I believe that this is a real opportunity for collective action. And again, I am not an optimist. I am a realist who chooses to aspire for something better. I think we have to be deeply intentional about supporting each other through this common crisis. This is almost an opportunity handed to us. Like, you can assume that people are stressed. You can assume that people are feeling lonely. You can assume that people are a little dysregulated and looking for calm amidst chaos. Therefore, we can all offer it collectively and draw together with that bundle of sticks idea. But we have to also be very aware that there are other forces that are really doing the exact opposite right now. And so that is why we, I believe, as youth advocates, have to really talk about what we need to do. Without getting political, we just have to do it by saying our job is to protect young people and to shape the future.
Okay, next question. In the midst of pandemic, access to some fields for effort and connection for youth like the arts and team sports is unsure. How do we respond and create alternatives?
Yeah, so I wish I had all of the answers for this. I'm doing lots of talking and lots of collaborating. I'm not sure we have figured this out yet. A lot of things can be done remotely, virtually, in terms of human connection. We can do things outside in a non-contact way that still allow physical education. You can still go outside and do the arts and whatnot. But I agree emphatically on the point that all of these things are healing and very important aspects of human connection. And the other thing I want to just say about this time is that because human connection is so healing, we have to understand and be ready for the fact that when we're thinking about youth, the pandemic is widening disparities, because some kids are going to have be home in loving, warm homes where parents are going to be really thoughtful about joining with another family to make sure you have some human connection for your kids, getting your kids art spaces, getting your kids physical spaces, keeping them up for in school. Those kids, you could argue, are going to be even better off. But it's the kids who don't have that, the kids whose families are struggling economically, who don't have the wherewithal to be thinking of these questions, the disparities are going to broaden. And when we have always counted on teachers as being the most important people in kids' lives other than parents, to be the eyes and the ears of what is going on in kids' lives, it is harder to do that remotely. And the kids who are not engaging remotely or participating, so the disparities are going to widen. And that is something we have to be very vigilant about, which is why the question that was asked must be attended to. And it must be attended to not just on a family level, but on a cultural and societal level. What are we doing to make sure that all kids are still participating in group activities, have opportunities for physical, creative, and emotional release? But the concrete answers, I don't have down yet. I don't think anybody does yet.
Okay, lots of questions. How do we help students get out of the vicious cycle that exists within underserving neighborhood?
I believe, I'm not going to answer that now, because I believe it's what the whole talk is about. But let me say this, we work on two levels. This talk is about working with the individual to find the best selves and to be change agents in their lives. That's where we're going, all right? But let me be really clear. We all, youth development folks, have to work for justice, because I am not naive. And when I work with a young person who's going to be going back to dangerous streets, then I know there's only so much I can do. So personally, I work on two levels, advocating societally and culturally, and working with the individual. This talk, I believe I'm going to answer your question very deeply on the individual level.
Okay, next question. Kids often adopt the beliefs, right or wrong, of the people around them. Are there strategies or methods to bridge divisive views? Yeah,
so the first thing that you can't do is ever condemn a kid's family or community, which makes this a little bit dicey, right? So you can't say, I fundamentally disagree, or your parents did this. You know, I don't expect you guys to know this, but I've been working with youth enduring homelessness for now, I think it's 38 years. So I work with a lot of kids who have come from deeply toxic families, kids who've been abused from the time they've been 4 or 5 years old. Kids, it is not uncommon for me to work with young people who actually were sold by their parents starting at 4 to 5 years old for sexual exploitation. I work with things you can't imagine. But I will tell you this, that anything that is said about a family of origin must come from the kid. Once we begin taking sides, the kids will actually end up largely defending the same families that hurt them so deeply. So we listen to the kid, and we model the kind of adults young people deserve in their lives. So it's not the words we say, it's what we do, giving those safe, secure, sustained relationships. We model health. We reparent by giving kids the kind of strategies that they deserve. And in so doing, we protect the kids from the other forces without directly confronting or denigrating them.
Okay, next question. How can we set appropriate boundaries for adolescents so that they are still able to explore and experiment but not go into unsafe territory?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about that a little bit later when we talk about parenting. But the gist of it is that it's about how we deliver the message. If we deliver the message, you may not do this, kids will rebel against us, right? That's the authoritarian model. When we give boundaries that basically say, I care about you, and because I care about you, I'm going to let you make a lot of mistakes in the world, but I'm not going to let you do this because it's not safe. When you put safety boundaries in the context of caring, kids will listen to you. Let's take one more question, because you can save all of them for the end. I just want to get to a break. Otherwise, we're going to like literally, with 500 people on the call, we're going to, do this. So one more question.
One more question, and I think you might save it till the end, but do you have resources to recommend for an adolescent who is asking about spiritual options? The COVID-19 months have prompted this question often.
Yeah. I don't have a direct answer to spiritual resources because spirituality can mean so much. But I do believe intensely in listening. I can't tell a kid what to believe, but I believe just listening to kids' struggles spiritually to try to understand the world in a larger way, the power of human connection, the possibilities of there being a force, and just listening to kids express themselves, I believe is deeply healing. So I allow kids to reveal their spiritual selves all the time. Now, in Reaching Teens, there is a chapter written about spirituality and religion and when to bring that in to kids' lives. But because there's so many different models, I do not have a specific source or website to go to. I do I invite you to celebrate what a kid feels. At the same time, I invite you to listen hard as kids sometimes talk about how their traditional religious upbringing made them find themselves and parts of themselves not acceptable. And our challenge really is in working with young people whose sense of being, whether it's their gender or sexual identity or sexual orientation or other issues, things they knew were happening to them during their life that they knew were sinful. I had a kid a few months ago, one of the best interventions and breakdowns that I've ever experienced. A kid I barely knew, but I had an amazing session with 1 week. The next week he comes to me for sleep medicine. He comes to me for sleep medicine because he's come up all night. And it was because he realized that he was a demon child. I listened to him to ask him what he meant by that. And he began saying, the things I did were of the devil. And then he began, and I said, tell me. And then he began telling me about how when he was abused, of course, he didn't use the word abuse. He saw himself as a participant at 5 years old. And when we worked with him, and I work at Covenant House, which is a religious organization, I brought in the pastor, and we literally, I was actually down on my knees pleading for him to see himself as he deserved to be seen. And he saw me as down on my knees in the beginning of prayer. It wasn't my intention. He dropped to his knees. We worked with the pastor and we prayed for him to see himself as a little boy again, as a good, pure soul who someone took advantage of. I have goosebumps right now. One of the most powerful things I ever did. And that was by listening to the kid's spirituality and the harm done to his spirituality, and then bringing in a religious figure who was our pastor to be able to talk about how God really saw children. It was amazing, amazing. So let's take a break. It is now 7 minutes after 10 East Coast time.